All right.
Squash it.
Now, I am worried that this is a tough part of the class. So please do something so that I know that you're hearing what has to be said and that you're kind of getting it. Like, I don't know, collapse or do something with your eye or something that I know is going on. This is the second part, which we started to develop last time on identity and difference. This is the difference part. Now, I want you to really imagine in your head or somewhere, foot, if you shut your eyes really tightly and you picture in your head nothing, what does it look like? Just black.
Fuzzy kind of white noise.
Okay.
It's like a hole, like disappearing into a hole.
Something like, I don't know, like a gaseous, I don't know, yeah.
Gaseous, oh, that's interesting, yeah.
Sort of black grey.
Okay.
Like static.
Black static.
Feels I get like a random kaleidoscope.
Oh, right. The California boy speaks. That's good. Surfing, yes?
Like a white hole.
What do you get?
Like a white hole.
White hole.
I'm struggling to envisage it.
What do you get?
I'm struggling to envisage nothing.
Okay, so nothing is being envisioned in your nothing.
Exactly, so nothing is a something in one.
Right, okay, good. Mark?
It's like something that's disappearing.
So there's a
something
movement
there.
that's happening,
Yeah.
there's a inging thing.
There's a bit of sound
Down
going
the
on.
bottom of a well.
Down the bottom of a well. So there's like, it's a circular thing. Is there depth then? Okay, so is it dark? Does it smell? Okay, so it just,
Maybe a bit.
maybe could, okay. I'm just curious, like, because a well, because it's important.
It was dark. Well, you remember I didn't used to be a hippie at the end of the 60s, and I used to do meditation. And,
You were a hippie.
Well, you said I was. I didn't think I was, but you told me I wasn't.
Well, if you did meditation, hello.
All right, then I was a hippie, and in a suit. And
So many were.
I know it sort of develops sort of volume as you go on, but
So-
all I get at the moment is blackness.
Okay, so there's maybe something to do with meditation, maybe something to do with this blackness. Andrew?
It might be something like the Aurora Borealis, which is kind of edgeless, but there was elements of colour.
I mean, in your mind, you actually thought about the Aurora Borealis.
It wasn't that, it's just I was trying to think, how could I explain what I was thinking?
Yeah.
But then I dismissed it because there seemed to be something there, so that wasn't the thing.
So for anybody who had color, either there was a multitude of color, or there was a complete absence of a pigment color, so black, because light would be white if you had an absence of color.
Mm.
So it'd be black, right? Or it would be, that would be nothing. Okay. Let me try it one more time with something else now. Now we're going to try envision difference. Shut your eyes. Really think about this. What would difference look like? Difference. I'm going to go around the room the other way now. Damson?
Pink and furry.
Pink and furry. Okay. Mark? Nothing, blank.
A door.
A door. Okay, a door.
And a
like,
lock. There's a key there.
and that's difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
A really long line.
A really long line. Huh, I'm gonna have my work cut out for me. Okay, yeah. Andrew.
I saw points to cones for some reason,
Huh.
opposing each other.
Points of two cones.
Imagine if two cones,
Yeah,
put them point forward.
yeah.
I didn't see the other side.
Yeah, just the two
Just the two
cones.
points coming through.
Cones.
I don't know. I'm having trouble because of that.
That's right.
It's experience. Sort of focusing.
Okay, so it's a kind of cone type thing.
I didn't see anything, but I sort of felt I was sort of focusing on something. But I was
So,
sort of just trying
in fact,
to think.
difference didn't even have a visual
well, I was able to focus on something that wasn't there, but
That's very good.
yeah, I mean, I didn't see anything. No, I didn't
Okay.
see it's sort of nothing because there's a pill difference. I can't. It's got to be different from. So again, I'm not doing that very well.
No, that's all right. So it implies a relation then for you.
Yeah, difference doesn't exist on its own.
Okay,
So yeah, it's a relation.
good.
I think a curved, wavy surface, like a mathematical surface topology, a lot of different sort of spikes and number patterns.
Okay. George?
I'm getting sort of linear, black and white, geometric almost.
You mean you're envisioning like just as though there were lines like on a television screen or something?
No, not multiple lines, one line.
Oh, one line.
Mm.
And the line is very thick?
The line's down the middle. No, the line's separated in black
So
and
it's
white.
down the middle, so there is a framed environment?
No. It's not a framed environment, no.
Okay, so it's the middle of what?
Down the middle of what? Of what I'm imagining.
Okay, good answer.
I was saying, I was like it's black, it's rectangle, but then kind of wavy white lines. So it's black and white, no
A
colour.
black rectangle.
Yeah. That's such a size.
So it's a black rectangle like that, and then what
It
happens
was a
to it?
rectangle portrait.
Oh, it was okay, that makes
That's
sense.
right. And
Okay.
then just white, wavy, whitey, grey lines. It was black and white.
And they are somehow linked to each other, or what?
No, I don't know what was going on. I just kept thinking difference.
Okay. Right. Oh, Millie.
Kind of like oil and water, but not like, do you know what I mean? When one's resting and another, that's
Yeah.
what I got.
And so what would be the difference there?
I don't know, that's what I thought.
Okay.
It took me a while to get to anything, to be
Okay.
honest.
That's right. So luckily you recall. Yes,
Yeah.
Sophie?
I've had this since I was a child actually. It's when I shut my eyes I see like thin man, fat man, but it's really spooky and scary. And it's like
Man, fat man. What is
Yeah.
wrong with you guys?
they morph into one another. I used to get it as a child, and that to me is kind of like different. It's like
And how is that difference? I mean, very well might be. How is that difference?
I don't know, but both of them were scary. Neither was nice. So I don't know.
So is difference then the emotion of fear or something like that?
No, it's the difference of the shapes. It's like they morph from one to the other.
Do you get that like really intensely when you're sick as well?
You can tell me that you
Yeah,
get
I
this
get
too.
that.
Oh
get
really?
that.
I get it really
I've had it
intensely.
since-
Yeah, I have had it
You
since I
get
was
thin man,
young.
fat man.
I know exactly what you said.
Really?
You said that.
Oh wow, that's
I
weird.
get
That
it.
is weird.
But that's not what I thought of when I think of difference.
Oh really?
Okay, but
Cool.
we'll get to you in a second. Yes. Go on. So that was can you describe or can you explain why that came to you, or
As
just what
difference?
came to you? Because Millie's answer is that's what you asked for this picture, and this is the picture you got. You know, so do you have some sort of
But
Rationale.
intellectual reason why I chose it, or why it just came. I know. I think because they relate to each other, the two images.
okay? So there's another relate word. Okay.
Nothing visual, just potential. There's this idea of kind of unending potential.
Okay.
So
Good. Okay. So it doesn't see, you don't see it. It's
nothing visual.
it's kind of a to be type of thing.
Yeah. Or
It's a potential.
Yeah. Becoming or
Becoming. Yeah. Okay.
possible.
Possible. Okay. You did not think of fat than that.
No, mine was more like Simon's, where difference isn't a thing. So I just had loads of things, and then that was all. Nothing, so it's too much.
So the difference was that you just had a multitude of things.
Because everything is different in comparison to everything else.
Okay. And did they have colors or did they have shapes?
Yeah, it was those things.
Okay. So why wouldn't that be identity? That's annoying. Why did I get the question? Okay, we'll just hold that.
Mine Mine was like a black ground with 2 yellow circles with like stripes on them, like targets. They were together and then they moved apart.
Say that again?
Black ground.
Okay,
Yeah.
a black ground.
Ground.
Okay.
Like it's black stuff.
But could you stand on that ground if you wanted to?
Oh no, not that kind of ground.
No.
I'm thinking more like a painting.
Okay, right.
Ground. With 2 yellow circles that had like black wings inside them, like like targets, kind of, and they were like next to each other like that, and then they went apart like that.
So the difference that you're envisioning is in your mind. I mean, is moving.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, some were you talking about
furry.
pink and furry? That's right. Of course. Yeah, but someone, Andrew, maybe it was you that was talking about the moving.
I think
No, we were talking about moving.
Yeah, no, mine morph from one to the other. It's not, it's
Mine's
mutable.
mine split apart from yours.
But there's still like movement. That's
Yeah.
what I mean. Anybody else have movement? Yours was becoming, so that implied movement, except it didn't have any shape, so that was another thing. Yours was, there's a lot of things in it, so there was some form of movement. But mainly, were they like dancing little bugs or something like that? They were just.
It was, like all the different things, yeah, they were images, but they were just like whizzing past so fast that I couldn't think of one specific one like everyone else has said. Like, yes, it was definitely pink and furry. Yeah.
Okay. So we have our work cut out for us. That's what this tells me. Okay, and you have great imaginations. Now, I'm not sure where the door comes from and the key.
I'll change now.
Okay, what is it now?
It's just a sound. It's like 2 sounds.
2 sounds.
Yeah, but they're just like an octave apart. They're the same note, but they're like an octave apart, and it's A.
Oh God. Not A equals A, but it has.
Oh yeah.
Oh, what a surprise.
Okay, now, okay. How many people had a chance to read Heidegger's thing on difference? Okay, having read that, how many people would like to revise their comment about how they visualize difference? How many people remember what was read in the sorry, that scroll? Anybody want to take a running stab at rethinking?
I'll have a go at it.
Okay.
Answer myself. I mean, the thing that fascinated me about the reading was that the sort of is both sameness and difference
Okay, good.
simultaneously. And I suppose when I was looking, I must say I don't have much faith in this exercise of what we're meant to see, but I saw nothing on both occasions, but the focus did sort of change, and I felt the distance, I was moved further forward, if you like, as though there was a space.
So when you were thinking of nothing, then it shifted to when you were thinking of difference, there was a movement forward
Yes,
where.
it was just as though the space was becoming larger, and that might just be.
Okay. We'll start with the is, yep. No. That's like being in motion. Anybody want to take a stab at this? Sophie?
Well, he talks about belonging and having distance, having to have a sense of belonging and a sense of loneliness to create that difference as well.
Well, to create the identity.
Well, both really, isn't it? Because
Yeah, but don't go to difference yet in that way, but go on, continue.
oh, okay. Just really that the idea of flow and having a distance as well, and having a sense of difference is having the sense of distance and things coexisting and existing at different times as well.
Like parallel universes.
Kind
or
of,
parallel octaves or something.
but also that existence, say this one giving a tune to the other one as well, so that they reflect each other or they impact on each other.
almost. Okay, I'm gonna put you out of your misery. Okay, I'm going to help you here. This is the great advantage of being an MA student as opposed to a PhD student, which you'd be tortured till you got it. Tell me it, yes. Okay, let's try it, sorry. It's easier to think about the word identity because it sounds like an element. It sounds like, in fact, it is an element. You can say, I have an identity, or when you're upset and you can't figure out who you are, you feel like you've lost your identity. So you can either find it, you can lose it, you can change it, it's malleable. There's something about identity that has those properties. It's a common word, it's a word that we can understand. And what Heidegger does with the word identity is he basically goes back to, well, we know he goes back to Parmenides, but before we go into that, he goes to Hegel. And for those of you that didn't take the course last semester, the thumb note, the thing that you need to remember, you need to know about Hegel, and in fact about a certain kind of metaphysics, is that it is a logic that is very powerful because it claims to be able to, and in some ways actually does, explain everything. Because the basis of dialectical logic, or what comes to be understood as logic, so that's another thing, is that it's comprised of elements. The thesis, which is on one side of the paper, and the antithesis. And the thesis, here, oops, this paper's easier to show. Thesis, where something's on it, and the not thesis, the antithesis, where nothing's on it. And if you, these are two elements, and if you take them together, and you synthesize the one into the other, and it's, quote, sublated is the term. Anyway, for those of you that didn't take it last semester, don't worry. It creates the whole picture. And the whole picture is how you know that you've made a comment that's not just your opinion. If you have an opinion, and you want to say I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong, how would you argue that? How would you argue your position? You would have to be able to come up with a way of arguing that either shouts loud. This was the Socratic question. Socrates says that there are different ways in which one can win an argument. And the usual way is the military way, which is might makes right. So those who have the bombs and drop them tend to win. Those that don't have the bombs or can't drop them tend to lose. It's a very specific kind of logic. Yes, you push that way. No, you can't go anywhere, or you can push back. And so the field of the thought pattern is like a square. Picture it as a square. I can do it this way. So if I push this way, then that forces the group to go to the wall, or they push this way, that forces me to go to the wall. And that's one type of logic. That's called linear logic or zero sum. It's called zero sum because if I push this way, it minuses this group's ability, or if they push this way, it minuses my ability. So 1 minus 1 is 0. It all adds up to 0, to a big fat 0. That's zero sum. Z-E-R-O dash sum. And I don't have a pen yet. I can't believe it. Anyway, the sign is the summation sign. The Greek summation sign looks like an E, like a kind of funny looking E. So zero sum. Now, zero sum is a really particular way of thinking, and it inhabits a lot of science. Not sophisticated science, I have to say, but what comes to be understood as science, comes to be understood as logic. And Heidegger is criticizing this because he's saying that notion of I have it, you don't, you have it, I don't, where the notion of difference is that which I don't have. So I have something that you don't have, or you have something I don't have, and so you have something, quote, different than I have. I have this territory, and then I can't go any further because you have the rest of it, or you have the territory and then you can't go any further because I have it. So the difference is that which isn't your own. Like, can you see that? That's one form of difference in a logic. And Heidegger's saying that's not a good way of looking at it, apart from the fact he's not talking about a closed pattern like this. He's saying the reason that's not a good way of looking at difference in this situation is because actually, even though you have something that I want or I have something you want, and that's what is the difference, is different in that sense, they're in fact the same thing. Have you ever heard that expression, same but different? You know, it's, you know, I could say 6, or I could do this. Now these are obviously different things, but the word 6, or like 6 typewriters and 6 apples, they're obviously different things, but they're the same. So the same but different. And the notion of what was in your head with having all the multiple things, that's actually the same as having one thing. So the very fact that they're, you know, we're all, quote, different people. I mean, I can't eat your food. Well, I can eat your food, but I can't eat your food for you. You can't eat my food for me. You know, for those of you that are parents and your kid gets sick, you want to always be sick for them rather than seeing them suffer. That kind of thing goes on. Or, you know, likewise, if you are with your parents, you know, your parents, believe it or not, will feel this way, or if they don't feel this way, you should, you know, safe use of knives. No, I'm just kidding. Now, the thing is, that's not the kind of difference that's being talked about here. And this is where it gets complicated or useful, both complicated and useful. So, I'm first going to explain to you what's not being said. Then I'm going to explain to you what is being said. What is not being said is that first form, zero sum. Zero sum comes from classical liberalism, or actually classical, it's called classical liberalism. And when I say classical liberalism, I don't mean the Lib Dems or that kind of liberal. I mean, what's his name, Bacon, or Montesquieu. These are classical liberals who are based on reason, but the notion of reason is that you join in on something. You're an individual and you decide to jump in and join the story. So you can come in. Someone like Heidegger is saying you don't have a choice to join. You're in it. You are in it, however the it is. And the in that you are in, the it that you are in, is an is. You're always in an is. It's not so much that you're always in the present, although the word is implies present. It's that one is part of the world that they're also separate from. We're all part of, I don't know, England. I don't mean as a citizen, I mean as a being in this environment. We're all part of the School of Art. And when you leave the School of Art, you better feel bad. You better have, like, Henry calls it umbilical whiplash, where you try to get away but you can't. You're drawn back to the mothership. Okay, but it's this kind of, you know that you both belong here, but you have your own individual lives. Make sense so far? Mm-hmm. So what Heidegger is saying is that that form of belonging is talking about a very specific kind of is that is both spatial and temporal. Is being present, so the time is present, temporal means time, so time, present, present time. But unlike Hegel, where you can't get out of the is unless something is mediated, so he basically makes the argument, which you can either just write down or just listen to, because this was last semester, and for those of you that haven't taken it, it's too complex to go over now. Just to hear this one little bit, which is that what Hegel and Hegelian dialectics argue is that you have to approach the present, but you can never inhabit it. And there's a whole series of reasons why this is the case. So the one starts in Hegel with nothing, or what he calls the immediate, the not mediated, the immediate, the instant. Now, for Heidegger, he wants to start in the present. That makes him highly political. That also makes him highly not political. It's annoying. You'll see what I mean in a minute. He wants to start talking about the lyric of something, the rhythm of something as part of its logic. But how do you really talk about that? How do you know you've got it right in your work? How do you know that that's happening? So what Heidegger starts to develop is that the way you can tell, or the way it becomes clearer, is that it has something to do with the tool, a special tool, and that tool is called difference. So difference is an element of identity. It's something completely different. To think difference is to think about the possibility of that which exists so differently that its way of being able to speak about it is non-existent. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that literally to try and speak about it, you can, as Simon was pointing out, you can only speak about it in a relation. So difference can be, let's say, captured by thinking it through in terms of a relationship. But in fact, what is difference is hard to say at this point of the game. And he comes up with a way to say it. Now, you're probably wondering, well, why is this, who cares, how does that help me? So the part of the answer to that question, how does it help me, is that in your work, in a work of art that works as a work of art, that is to say, you know when you've done work, or I hope you know when you've done work that doesn't work. You just look at it and you go, right, bad. Or you just add one more bread, the whole thing falls apart. So it's kind of like you just added something and it just doesn't work. And what has happened is that you have created a situation where the difference gets smothered out of something. So what you have to try to do is to maintain in your work a certain form, a certain spacing that will allow for something totally other to be present. If you can't get this thing that is totally other to be present, it's never going to work as art. Now, you don't have to think of it rationally and think, okay, where's that totally other thing? I know it's somewhere in this painting, or it's in my performance, or whatever. There are people, and I assume it's everybody in this room to start with, who do get this on some sort of intuitive level. You sort of, you can feel your work working, but if you want to be able to make your work work when you want it to work, and not when the work just decides to bubble up and go, hello, I'm feeling creative today, and you try to catch it, and it just dies on, it goes away. That's a problem. So in order for you to learn the tools of your trade, you need to understand really what this difference is. And this difference is the key. In that sense, your door thing was kind of interesting, very interesting. It's the key to helping you make your tools come to life. So here's the first thing to remember about this difference animal. It's real. It has some form of an existence. It just doesn't have a normal one. By normal, we mean anything you've ever thought of, and anything you will think of, and anything you may have thought of on any level. That's how odd this is. And somehow your work has to incorporate that. That's the first step. Second thing is it offers a logic, but the logic is not this linear thing. It's not dialectical logic. It's a logic that is based on, as we will find as we go on in the course, the rhizome. Now the rhizome, R-H-I-Z-O-M-E, the rhizome is a spore. The rhizome, well actually the rhizome is not a spore. The rhizome is, for those of you that are gardeners, a rhizome is like a tuber. It spreads out and it only spreads on the surface. Doesn't really, I mean it has roots, but they're not really roots. It's not roots in the same way that a tree has a root, which is why Deleuze and Guattari take this on as a point. So this rhizome, which can spread in any direction. It can spread depending on the wind. It can spread depending on no wind. It has some kind of way of spreading. This becomes the terminology for a kind of logic called rhizomatic logic or discursive logic, which begins to run along a surface. So the question becomes, what is this surface, and where does difference fit into this? So the first thing you have to divest yourself of, so you can see where we're going. We're going to this rhizome moment. The first thing you have to divest yourself of is that difference is not an element. Difference belongs to the great category of the zero. It's not a number, and it's not a number. It's a not number, like a zero. In fact, what we'll find out next week is that Lyotard, L-Y-O-T-A-R-D, Lyotard, holds that the great concentratory, zero, the great it's got some kind of life to it, or some kind of energy to it, but it doesn't follow a logic of any of the logics you'll have. So the word difference acts as a placeholder, like the word zero acts as a placeholder for that thing that exists between 1 and -1, or exists as, looking through nothing. It just is a marker. The word difference is just a marker. Now Derrida, D-E-R-R-I-D-A, Derrida is going to call this différance with an A at the end. So D-I-F-F-E-R-A-N-C with an accent over the A. Différance in French sounds the same as difference, an E, and so visually when you look at it, you can tell it's, quote, different, but hearing it, you can't tell it's different. And this is one of the ways in which Derrida begins to develop his version of difference, that you can hear it, but you can't see it, or you can see it, but you can't hear it. It's a very odd piece. And you will find that anyone working in art, either as an artist or as a theorist or as both or whatever, as practice-led, is going to have this use of difference in their work. So it's critical that you get a sense of what's being said here. So we're going to start again with what Nick pointed out. We have the is, and we know that this word is developed in the argument by A equals A. We know, so we have this famous A equals A, and it's stuck together there's a relationship. Being apart, being together. Being apart, being together at the same time. You're apart and you're together at the same time. So the first thing you must remember about being apart and being together at the same time is that being apart and being together at the same time creates a different kind of time. It creates simultaneous time. You're being apart and you're being together at the same time. Now, it's simultaneous time, not in the sense that I'm doing something right now and somewhere in, Portugal, someone's doing something, and so we're doing something at the same time but in totally different places. This is the same entity doing something the same and different at the same time. Okay, so it's not like I'm also in Portugal at the same time. It's that the A and the other A are the same A, but they're also apart. Now, I'm going to try it again with your imaginations. Except this time we're not going to go around the room. If you can just shut your eyes for a second and envision a surface, just picture a surface, whether it's like you're working on the surface of a song, or you're working on the surface of your palette, or you're working on the surface of a proscenium, or you're doing theater. You got a surface. Now this surface, just keep your eyes shut and do not fall asleep. This surface has a depth. The surface has a thickness, you could put it that way. So the thickness that you're dealing with, which is part of your surface, not part of the structure, it's part of your surface. This is going to be the embodiment of difference, because you're going to have things that are, because the notion of difference is going to allow for depth, it's going to allow for simultaneity, it's going to allow for duration, like how long does it go for. This is where the difference comes in. Now, okay, try and think about, in your own work, just the surfaces that you're playing with. Nothing else. Like in your, Annika, in your work on the surface, what would be, how would you describe the surface of your work? How would you describe the surface of your work? Like, that's fair
Well,
enough.
it's strange because when you first said imagine surface, I imagined the surface of my work.
Great. And what does it look like?
It's fluffy.
And pink?
And blue. It's blue. Blue.
Fluffy and blue.
Uh-huh.
Fantastic. See, because you were very close on this. Okay, it's fluffy and blue, and that's the surface.
Mhm.
Great. So already you can see that in this example, a surface has a color, it has texture, it has all these things, but it's not coming in as its identity. It's coming in as this unsayable something. So the thing is that to try not to have a sense of difference as being an element. What were you thinking about the surface?
Oh, well, mine was projection, so it was light, and it had sort of blurry edges, and it was all lots of different light and moving light.
And so the surface for you is that it's not on anything. The projection itself becomes the surface,
Yeah.
right? So almost like a beam of light.
Yeah, but it's kind of concrete as well. It's sort of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Anybody else want to give it a go?
I was like the sense, it's like indentation, very white.
Nice. Now we're getting somewhere. And you thought of that too.
I thought about paper, but then I couldn't really figure out paper, how it was a surface that was separate to its structure.
I
Because
know,
it's so,
tough.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. This is where we're getting. We're slowly but surely peeling away the old notion of surface, and you hang on to it with all your might. Honestly, you guys are moderns, you know. Luckily, on some level, but anyway, you know, you hang on to this notion of surface, that there must be a structure underneath the surface in order to give it a surface. But what Heidegger is arguing is that there is no underneath. There is no ground. The ground, to the degree to which something requires a way to make it make sense on a, just write this down because then explain it to you. To make it make sense from moment 1 to moment 2, from M1 arrow to M2, and it's written M subscript 1 and M subscript 2, just so you know how to do maths. So from moment 1 to moment 2, you get the same idea, or you get the same meaning, you get the same thing. Now it might not look literally the same, but you're able to create a situation where it's repeatable, or it's predictable,
So
or, what?
just wonder if you wouldn't mind repeating that bit, how it relates to the ground and the surface.
Yes, so, if some of the students were nervous about coming in, you can send them in if you see them. 'Cause they- Anyway, yes, so the ground, a ground is used in logical discussions as a way to say, this is what allows me to make this argument. I'm grounding the argument, I'm nailing it to something, I got it so that there's a way in which the logic can be repeated and then repeated and repeated. So there's a way in which you can, so it's just not my opinion. So if I say to you, look, this is what I think about X, Y, and Z, and you say, well, I think something completely different than X, Y, and Z, and so we both go at it trying to discuss this. Neither of us would be grounded if we just got louder and louder. That would not, or let's say the ground would be the loud and loud and loud. That would be the thing that would allow us to make this argument, but it's not really very helpful. This is the Socratic move, or this is the Themistocus move, where he basically says, you know, why would it might make right? So that becomes the ground, that becomes the way in which the logic makes sense. So if you're going to be a detective, or forensics, right, you're going to come up with a question. You're going to have all these elements around. You're going to have all these things that you come across, and you've got to figure out what sort of ties them all together. You've got to figure out the logic. Now, if there's something that ties it all together into a nice little whole, you're not going to be using Heideggerian logic on this particular thing. So you need to think out of the box, as it were, or out of the dialectic. Another way of putting this is that in the networked economy, a different logic is at foot. You know this intuitively because you're used to being on your computers. So you can go on the so-called network, and you can surf the network. Well, what are you actually surfing? You're not really surfing, you know, a bandwidth. You're actually, but you are surfing something real. When you talk about Google search engines or cookies or spiders, the bots, and whatever the various things are that they're inside the computer, but not really. They're actually outside the computer, but where are they located? This is getting closer to understanding how difference literally exists. So if we smashed this computer, and I would have to kill all of you, if that happened, I just got this, we would not find any files inside, but we know that they show up. We know that somehow they come to the screen. Now that's the relation between 0 and 1. But the 0 that has been figured out in this relation between 0 and 1 is not the 0 of nothing versus the 1 of something. It's the 0 of difference versus the 1 of let's say, sameness. So you could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could have many ones, but it's still a 1. It still belongs into the category of, let's say, a segment. The 0, on the other hand, is not a nothing. It's a something that is just the difference version of this something. The 1, are you following this, or is it making a little bit of sense?
Yeah.
Yes. She says no. Okay, so so where we're going to drag Heidegger into the kicking and screaming is understanding really how the networked age operates as difference. That's sort of where we're heading. Okay, let's just back up again. So I want you to, so blue and fluffy, pink and fluffy.
Furry.
Oh, furry, sorry. So sometimes the difference can exist as a thing, as an element, as an identity. There you have identity as difference. Sometimes the difference exists as this kind of unsayable something, this zero. And sometimes the difference exists like a skin, like something in between that which is not a part of it and that which it's just literally the surface.
Sorry,
Yes.
on that, wouldn't the zero just then be a skin between 1 and -1?
Well, the zero, I mean, this, yes.
And
the
something you
yes,
said in
yes,
the
yes,
seminar,
yes.
it's not about being against something,
Yes,
but it is just being
Being.
something. So the zero is not, it's not that it's against,
it's not that it has an issue with 1 or -1.
it is.
It is completely different.
So
Yeah.
when we talk about skins and surfaces and things, are those metaphors?
No,
So they have some existence of their own somehow.
they have some kind of logic. Okay, this is what we're gonna try and get at here. The logic of skin. It's a very strange logic, and as artists, and I'm not trying to, glamorize you too much, a little bit, because as artists, you have fought to maintain your sensibility as a logic, or your logic as a sensibility, whichever fits. And that's something in this society, because you're forced to give it up as soon as possible, if not sooner, particularly now with the new government, or the government that hopefully, did you know that they have, yesterday they announced that people over the age of 70 will be restricted in getting medicines because they're not contributing to the society?
Yeah.
Besides which they've already had the best part of their lives.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Is that not, I mean, they just have to go, these people just have to go. I mean, it even makes you want to vote Liberal Democrat, God forbid.
No.
No, I'm kidding. That was a joke, that was a joke.
Because they're part of the problem, aren't they?
That whole rhetoric's hit on in the last few weeks because now there's this whole debate about the baby boomer generation, they've stolen all the kids' money, like they've got it good and they've got all this sitting on all the property
It's
and
like,
whatever.
it's like the banker,
that's
it's like a shell game.
Everyone,
You're being robbed by the bankers, and somehow they keep saying, oh, look over there. Oh, my favorite one, apart from that one, the baby boomer thing, was the flood victims. I'm very sorry for anybody whose houses are flooded right now, it's just awful. But, I don't know, the environmental minister was saying, well, what are you doing living in a floodplain? What are you doing living on Earth, It's like, excuse me? Pardon me, so I just went on a tangent there. So, the logic, you see, but there are logics to this. Always, one rule of thumb, always assume your enemy is at least as intelligent as you are. That is like the oldest rule in the book, or one of the oldest rules in the book. Never assume that they're stupid. Well, unless they really are stupid. But assume that there's some kind of logic that they're using. And the question is, what's the logic? Now, the word logic, which I've now used several times in this seminar, means that it's predictable. What predictable means is that you have an idea of what comes next. The what comes next is part of the prediction. But if you're using bad logic or faulty logic, your what comes next is going to take you in the wrong direction. And if you use a logic that doesn't allow for multiple directions, you're going to go in one direction. Now, you're not going to live forever and ever, sorry. You're going to live forever as long as you live. But it's not forever. And as a result, you only have so many hours in the day, and so many days in the week, and weeks in the year, and all so on and so forth. So make it work. So figure out the logic. Now, when I say figure out the logic, I'm not suggesting that the logic is rational in the way that Hegel would talk about rational or reason. I'm not talking about that form of reason. The reason is also not necessarily the Kantian Enlightenment reason, although that's part of it. Because suppose, how we started early on when you were just weed little things. Supposing it could be otherwise. what would your otherwise look like? How do you throw your imagination out there? You have to have some kind of logic that is not tied to a scientistic version, because that will be too predictable in a flat sense. So when I say predictable, really what's being put forward is probable. Now, probable is, you know, I know as artists you have been taught to run away from mathematics as fast as you can, or like a third eye comes down and you just think, oh, whatever. You know, it's like, oh my God, the M word. You know, it's a 4-letter word, I get it, but try not to do that. Try just to, just pretend for the time being that math and physics is a form of art. Actually, it is a form of art, but that's another whole longer story. So in bad mathematics, and many of you were taught badly, I think is the real problem. Mathematics is very sexy and very sensuous and has a lot of things going for it, but the one thing it doesn't have going for it is that in arithmetic, so 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4, that's what I mean by arithmetic. One assumes that it's a closed system. And because it's a closed system, it kind of is nice. It answers questions and it plays a nice sort of good game. You know, it's kind of nice and comfy. Now, to break this, there's a person named Gödel, I'm going to mention to you because I want you, those of you that actually, take this on, because it'll be on the essay questions. Gödel, G-O-D-E-L with an umlaut over the O. Kurt, K-U-R-T, Kurt Gödel. He came up with this thing called undecidability. It's a great word. Don't go running off reading his work yet, because it is very difficult to read. But what he argues is that in any system, of any logic, of any kind, there is always undecidability. And this thing called, and he says, including in simple mathematics, like even in 1 + 1 is 2. Now I dropped this into the pool right now because this word undecidability maybe will be more helpful for you than the word difference, because they're the same word. The mathematicians will call it undecidability. And in fact, Derrida borrows undecidability from Gödel. And he calls art undecidable. But it's the same word. So you gotta, so we're gonna keep playing with this so you get a sense of how it makes you alive, how it makes your work alive, well, it's just how it's alive. So, start again. So identity is naming something. Giving it a name. You can even give it a nickname. It's somehow, so if I say, you know, my name is Johnny, literally, my name is Johnny, you can go away and you can say to somebody, you know, I was just talking to Johnny today, and they would probably know who, I mean, if it was in this group, they'd know who you're talking about. They wouldn't have to go, well now, is that a made-up name, or who is that person? Or, you know, we have a shared way. We're grounded in this. We have a way of which we can share that particular term. It's a term called Johnny. But if we went somewhere else and you tried to explain it somewhere, you'd have to again attempt to do this whole thing of how it makes sense and how it doesn't make sense. So every concept, every element, everything that you deal with, that you touch, that you think, that you smell, that you feel, has a naming ability, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to communicate with each other. So without naming, in some way, we can't exchange communication. We can't make sense. You don't literally have to use language to name. You can use music, you can use, okay, you can do a lot of things, but if there's not a way in which that system is being understood, it's not identity. Identity creates the scenario, but it doesn't create it by itself. It requires an undecidable feature to it. Or it should require that, because not all systems really require that, which is why we have different forms of systems, like, for example, scientism, which is very flatly predictable. But also, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm really exhausted and hanging on by a threadette, I like to watch, like, you know, Diagnosis Murder, or, you know, Murder, She Wrote, or something like that. Something really banal. I mean, not even CSI or whatever it's called. You know, I want to watch something that is just so predictable. I know there's a bad guy and a good guy. I don't even know who they are. I know that the doctor is a good guy, and even though he's actually quite reactionary, but anyway, let's see. The doctor's a good guy, his son is a cop, that's also supposed to be a good guy. There's a couple of people on the doctor team that are good guys, and anybody else is a bad guy, and there's at least one murder, if not two, and they always solve it. Okay, always. And they always end up with a little laugh at the end. Okay, so a little chuckle, they share something that, you know, they're, I don't know, something unrelated to the fact that someone's just been murdered horrifically. Okay, so, and it makes me happy, because it's very predictable. Mills and Boons. Do you know what Mills and Boons is? Does everybody know what Mills and Boons is? Good. Okay, so Mills and Boons is, you know, that kind of, I had a friend who used to write the back covers for the Mills and Boons, made $30,000 a cover. It's like, what are you saying? It's like such a formula. Like, you know, X fell in love with Y. He had wonderful breath. He had horrible breath. He had, you know, it's like, it's just a formula, you know, like, you know, put it around, you know. It's something to think about if you need money. Covers to Mills and Boons type of things. Write the back covers. Anyway, this is a formula. This is a way of naming that is not what we're talking about. That's why Mills and Boons is not really art. It doesn't have that form of undecidability integral to it. So you can point out different forms of identity. You can point out different elements in the story, as it were, but you won't get any closer to either identity or difference with the Mills and Boons approach. And some of your work, unfortunately, becomes very Mills and Boons. It becomes too predictable. And I know that when I've had tutorials with some of you, I'll say, you know, it's almost like you need to add water to yourself. You're too freeze-dried. You're too tight. You need to, like, let it go a little bit. You know, or some of you let it go so much that it's like, you know, grasp it back a little bit, because it's now not predictable on any level. That's why in today's research thing that we did, in the tutorial with James, with the one that he had with the different collage, it was too predictable in a kind of odd way. So it wasn't working yet as art. He was trying to put difference in by literally saying, that's different, that's the same, that's different, and they're all the same, even if they look different. So try to, did that sentence make sense, or is that like bleh? Okay, for those people that didn't think it made sense, how can I help you understand? Because we're going to now go into the more hardcore. This is the most important thing you will learn before you write the analytic paper, is this notion of difference. You have it is the most important thing, and now Heidegger's way into it is only one way into the difference, which is why we're going to eventually get to Einstein on this. But first you have to get in your mind completely what difference is. So let's try it this way. Is anybody feeling a bit weak? Or not weak, that's a terrible word. A bit weepy, a bit weak, and a bit, you know, kind of, no. Does anybody want to have some kind of amplified notion of difference? Shall I try it again? Does anybody need for me to try it again? Okay, good. Okay. Let's go back to the network idea. When I ask you, if you shut your eyes and thought of the network, what would that look like to you? What would it look like to you?
Like lots of different things all within lines.
So there'd be vectors somehow, right? You know, they're not really lines, because the lines are formed how?
Formed how?
Yeah, how do those lines get formed in your network?
speaking to that thing or connecting.
Yeah, so there's all, but there's no actual logic as to why they're all connecting or not connecting, except maybe there's, you know, let's say, this is why I can't stand LinkedIn. I got all these, sorry, if anybody got inviting you into LinkedIn from me, I apologize, because it's like having this animal come into your, you know, computer system and just takes all your contacts and then says, hi, Johnny DeFilo has invited you into LinkedIn. And it's like I got all these things back from people saying, you know, I hate LinkedIn, how dare you do this? I'm like, I tried to erase LinkedIn, it wouldn't go.
You can't get rid of it.
No, it's impressive.
It's unbelievable.
So just ignore it. But the thing is that it forms a specific sequence. So there's a sequence that happens that allows one to begin to know where it's going to end up. Except it ends up just where you kind of tell it to end up. Well, not that, let me start again. You have no control over LinkedIn. We'll use that as an example. You know, or Facebook or whatever the thing is. I mean, by the way, if you ever get anything from me on Facebook, my partner does all my Facebook stuff because you know, it's just like I'm not a Facebook person. I just can't deal with it. But I have a Facebook moment happening. So just know that, you know, in case you see double things that are going on. Same thing with Twitter. It's not me. I can't quite get there yet. I will eventually, but not yet. Anyway, in those ways in which things link up, they link up because there's a sequencing that's going on. Now, a sequence is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a sequence, and the sequence is, but that's only the start of a sequence, because either the sequence is 1, and then the sequence is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What would be the sequence of that? Is that that's probably too hard to question.
8. Do you say 1, 2, 3?
Well, no, that's what comes next. You know, so
if I just adding 1.
It's okay. So you know that the sequence to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is just adding 1. So the sequence to that little thing was n plus 1. That's the sequence. So you get what a sequence is. So the sequence isn't the same thing as 1, 2, 3, but you know that you can figure out, because of the sequence, you know what comes next. You know what comes next is going to be 8. So the logic follows the sequence. Got it? Okay, so we have n plus 1. That's your logic. And it follows the sequence. Now, there could be different types of sequences. Like, for example, a cow. Picture a cow in your head. Let's say one that has black and white patches on it. Okay? Now, the baby cow that's born, called a calf, you know, the calf that's born also has patterns on it. These are black and white patterns. It's not going to be, you know, like purple and chartreuse or something. It's going to be black and white. And you're going to say that that calf belongs to that cow because of its sequenced patterns, not to mention the fact that you probably saw it get born, and so you knew it literally came from the cow and so on. But anyway, the point is that the sequence doesn't have to look literally the same. It doesn't have to be n plus 1. It can be squiggly round thing plus squiggly round thing, and you know that if you see, you know, n plus squiggly round thing, that's going to be a certain kind of pattern. The pattern doesn't have to be literal. Do you see that? Can you feel that one? Okay, so it's that kind of sequence that's really interesting that they figured out how to code. See, the n plus 1, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, speaks to a whole different logic, a logic that we are in the cusp of getting out of as a civilization. It's creepy. And now we're going into a time period. And when I say now we're going into a time period, I don't mean like, you know, at 2:30 on Wednesday, we will now be in that time period. I mean that we've been going into this time period for quite a long time, at least since, you know, the beginning of photography, but probably somewhere in that shift. Now what's happening is that the way in which the sequences get developed, they can have all sorts of weird additions to them. It could be n plus, you know, squiggly pattern. It could be n plus fluff, or n plus fur, plus pink, plus blue. You put that together, that becomes your sequence, and you'll know how to make it work in your work. Millie, wasn't your, the thing that you did, I think for RIP, wasn't it those plasticky kind of things or whatever it was on the floor, was that your thing?
Oh, yeah. Right there. There was bits of mirror.
No.
What, in the other room?
No, what was upstairs with
Oh, that wasn't me.
Sophie? Who was that your whole thing? Did you have those plasticky things on the ground? You know, in your...
Are you looking at me?
Yeah, looking at you.
You were looking at Millie.
I was looking at Millie, but now I changed it to look at you.
Okay.
You know, when you had your projections that were going on in that room in FO5?
They were Claire's. They're Claire's.
Claire's, okay, so can you describe them for people in case they didn't see them?
Well, I'm sure lots of you have you seen Claire's work? They're wax, and it's like she's made imprints with her hands. But quite often they're kind of negative shapes of it as well, and they're very delicate. And in the installation, she put them around the room and lit them. They were really beautiful, and they had a kind of luminosity, and they were very fragile looking. And
Yes.
some of them were in my projection as well. We sort of put them so that they caught the light of that as well.
So did everybody see them?
No, because we didn't really get to share our work, which was kind of silly, really, because
Anyway,
they were all
alright.
closed off. You know, you weren't allowed to like. I think you saw them, didn't you, Mel?
But all I'm trying to say is that
Yes.
there are things that form sequences that are odd in their shapes, but they belong together. So the belonging together is the key of the forming of the sequence. And the question is, how did they become belonging?
Does that link back to the rhizome?
Yes. Yes, it does. But let's just go again. So the belonging, I remember when I gave you that example of the football hooligan person. You know, you're on a train, you know, whatever, you're going in some direction, some person with a shaved head and swastika and whatever, you know, and waving the British flag, you know, what are they doing? And most of you got that they were going to a football match. Okay, now there's nothing utterly logical about that at all. But you know that they, I'll give you another example. Let's say you're walking down the street, you see someone with bright red hair with, let's say, black ends on it, lots of jewelry, fishnet stockings, male or female, and smoking a cigarette. What am I talking about?
Possibly a goth or a modern goth.
Okay, possibly a modern goth. What else could I be talking about? A prostitute, yes, possibly a prostitute, although interesting clientele. Anybody else? Drag queen. Drama student. I thought art student myself. But now the reason I'm saying that is because we have 5 different things that are all plausible given that that series of, that sequence I just put together. And depending on something else, and that's what we got to get to, depending on something, the relativity of something makes that sequence make sense or not. So what you're having to figure out here, what I'm tasking you to figure out,
It's temporal, isn't it? I mean, it is.
it's temporal and it's spatial.
Yeah.
And that's the key here, because or to put it, what I'm asking you to do is to think in simultaneous moments. Think simultaneously. This is going to be so difficult. When you get tired of trying to do it, just remember you're doing it anyway in your work. You need to think. You want to have a part of your lecture on contemporary art? That's part of it. You have to think simultaneously. Color, duration, time. Because in doing that, and it has to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, and make sense in the make sense, like make sense senses, make sensuous, make it alive. If it can't make sense happen, then it's not going to work as art. fact, it's probably just not gonna work at all, but it's certainly not gonna work as art, and it's certainly not gonna work as contemporary art. It's got to make sense. So your task then is to figure out what is your sequence. What is your 0 and 1 that's going on in the sequence? Whether it's painting, or a network, or sound. What creates that sequence so that it makes sense, so that it makes the sensuous alive? So this is what you have to keep playing with. You have to keep allowing yourself to breathe in this sense, the sexual. This is what people often talk about, the sexual as being part of art, or at the core part of art, because the sexual always allows for difference. Some people will argue it is difference, but that's another whole argument. I mean, maybe it's not another whole argument, but that becomes part of this argument. So the sensuous, the smell, the touch, the haptics of your work, they create a sequence. The sequence, the things that become n plus 1, or whatever that sequence is, the n of the sequence can be any shape, can be any color. It just, quote, depends. So we've moved now in this lecture-ish type thing I'm giving you right now, we've moved now from understanding, I hope, that identity, which initially is set up in Heidegger as A equals A, as A belongs, it's drawn to the other A, and that we last week went into the whole question of Parmenides and the question of the speaking, the way in which speaking happens, that we now move to some other way of understanding this repetitive ability to predict. Now, you're not predicting like the lottery. You're not predicting, who's going to win the horse race. What you're predicting is the fact that sense will be made. That's the prediction. And you don't necessarily know what is the sense that's being made. You can kind of tell when it's not made. But what's being made, what's being formed, informed, informed, information age, informed. What's being formed is the way these sequences take on very different types of elements. I use the word elements advisedly because it implies already an identity, an element. And in fact, difference has to be in there. So it's not like you have like identity, difference, identity, difference. That would be identity, 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 even if I say difference. It's not like if I was going and then I just stayed there and then whatever's around me is the difference. Then I do something else and whatever's around. No, difference is not other in that sense. That's how crazy difference is. Difference is much more both graspable and out of your reach, because it has to do with simultaneity. It has to do with duration. Now, Heidegger has a word for this. Can you think what this word is? Starts with- Yes, perdurance. How did you know that?
That's watched last week.
Yeah.
Well, it is that perdurance that contains the element of time and simultaneity. Singularity.
Smaller word. Space.
The pair is like alongside as well. isn't it?
Yes. So it's a neologism. So you're not going to find the word anywhere. Do you know a neologism means that it's a made-up word? Okay, that's just a nice, good dinner party word. Neologism. It took me a long time to know what neologism actually meant. My tutor used to always use it. It used to drive me nuts. Of course, I could have worked it out, but that would have been too easy. I'm also one of those kind of people that doesn't read the instructions when something comes. I want to figure it out before I read the instructions, in which case I go completely insane, and then I end up reading the instructions. Same thing with neologism. So neologism is a new logical word. Okay, so the word system, the word logic, and the word surface, they're all connected in this contemporary move that's being made. Now let's back up so we're all on the same page and you know precisely what's going on here. Because then we're going to go to Heidegger. You might need to take a small break because you need to live. What's going on and what you need to be very clear about is that in a time period called the age of technology, we know it's the logic of techna. Now, why that has become the main way of dealing with the world is not for this class. It's just to remind you that technology is not literally about the machines. But that doesn't mean they don't play a part. Because particularly in the computer age, it has revolutionized the way in which one can understand and be completely normal in simultaneity. Anybody that has a child, particularly under the age of 5, can see this. The child just knows already how to handle simultaneity. It's amazing. I mean, already know how to deal with the computers, not in the sense that they're not afraid of it, not that way, but they literally get the intuitive relationships on the computer. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but, you know, because I'm a little bit older than you. I'm even older than you. I'm 100,000 years old. Anyway, I find that I had to, because I'm into music, computing made sense to me. Because I like composition, it made sense. It operated very similarly for me. I still didn't understand it. And when I was growing up, you had to learn computer language. You had to learn BASIC, you had to learn everything, which, you know, like, and we also had cards. It was fantastic. So if you tripped, that was it. You know, that was it for like a semester's worth of work. You just wept, you know, and they couldn't be bent, and if they were bent, you can imagine you had to stand in these long queues and these huge things called computers, which needed fans because everything would get too hot, and then it would get too hot, and then they would break down, and honestly, it was annoying. However, nowadays, you can find a child, let's say anyone, particularly anyone between the ages of, let's say, 10 and 18, that group, they completely get this. It is fascinating. Now, that's a very specific techna. They get techna. You do too, in a certain sense. It's just that, well, most of you are pretty much between the ages of 10 and 18, but anyway. You sort of get the way in which this operates. It's almost very clunky trying to explain it to you. Here's what you have to learn. Learn the word perdurance. Learn what's actually happening. This word, event of appropriation, or the notion of the event, is this naming of dimensions as time and space and place and surface. We move from the world of the rational into the rational, meaning the reasoned logic, n+1 logics, to the world of the undecidable, the world of the difference, which deals with probability as part of what they call uncertainty. Now, I'm going to give you another thumbnail, and then we'll take a quick break. The world of uncertainty. No, start again. In the Enlightenment moment, in the move from let's say, an oligarchic position around dogmatic thinking and not giving people over the age of 70 prescriptions, in that world, which we seem to be rushing towards at the moment, but anyway, I digress, in the world where reason was not primarily a position, and then it became, it was put on the table, not again like a, scene 1, act 2, but it started moving in, what was put at the core of the Enlightenment, apart from the dare to know aspect, which I hammered home, was the idea that something could change. Change was absolutely the fundamental idea of the Enlightenment, apart from dare to know, because dare to know implies that you can change something, if nothing else yourself. And of course, John Locke, I don't know if you people have heard of John Locke, but John Locke, when he wrote the 2 treatises on government, he basically says, we own, property is a very important aspect, it's like another thing to discuss later. But he basically said that one has the right to property, and the most basic form of property is your body. And you have the right to do whatever you want with your body. That is a fundamental position of being a liberal. That's classical liberalism. It's based on the notion of the property, which has many issues to it. And as you might remember, Rousseau, in his discourses on inequality, when they said discuss his exam question was discuss the origins of inequality, and he wrote, when man drew a line in the sand with his toe, drew a circle in the sand with his toe, and declared everything within it mine, and found people stupid enough to believe it, that was the foundation of inequality. So it literally is fantastic. I mean, and by the way, just to really depress you, he was like 22 when he wrote his Discourse on Inequality, whatever. Anyway, now the thing is that position, so I just want you to get a sense of the notion of property, of owning your body. It's a very specific notion connected to a liberal ideology, classical liberalism. Both conservative, classical liberals don't necessarily mean, Lib Dems are not a good example, but classical liberalism is basically a conservative. Today it would be considered, like the conservative government would be a classical liberal. Hard to follow that, but anyway, the classical position is that you own property, and the very first property you own is yourself. That's why slavery is bad. Not because morally it's repugnant, but because you own your own body, and if you're human, the only way to argue that you can't own your own body is if you're not human, which, by the way, they came up with racism. So this owning of your own body, so what could you change in your body? What's the ultimate thing you could do with your body?
Donate your organs.
Okay, before that. What's the ultimate rule that you have on your body? Life. So you could end it. That was a primary position. Of course, it went against religion, because obviously if you killed yourself, you'd be excommunicated, or I don't know what happens, you have issues. And there's a lot of laws even now trying to get back to that one position of dignitas, for example, having the right to die, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea that you owned your body, and therefore you could take drugs, you could go do whatever you wanted, and as long as it didn't hurt anybody, this was pretty much wrapped into the argument, then you owned your body. And therefore you could enact change. You could create and you could take away. Up to that point, that was allowed for God. So it meant a very particular notion of change, and that change was based on certainty. We find in the age of technology that it's based on undecidability, which does not mean not being able to make up your mind. It means that there's a gap somehow which can never be completely closed. If you're thinking about a network, that network, even I make this movement with my hand, that network wouldn't work if it was closed onto itself, if it stuck together. It would be no way, because the network implies movement, and the movement, whether or not it's a trajectory of point A to B or whatever that movement is, in moving in that direction, in moving that way, it's undecidable, the way the rhizome is undecidable. Or to put it even slightly differently, it isn't about a decision. It happens. You know, the famous shit happens. It happens, that's how it goes. And in the happening, in that thing happening, the famous Forrest Gump movie, wasn't it Forrest Gump who runs? Yeah, so has anybody not seen Forrest Gump?
I've not seen it, but
Okay, well, Forrest Gump, I mean, not that you have to go see this movie because it's really, the plot is very, like, easy to grasp. So the guy is fed up with life and he just one day starts to run. And he just runs and runs and runs and runs. It's such a fantastic, you know, view for anybody that has mortgage and children and this and that, you know, everything else on your head, you know, debt, you know, just run and run and run and run. Okay, so this notion of being able to just keep moving, this was the, you're right. This was a right. You could do this with your body. This is again, this is a classical position. So if you think to yourself, how does it stop? Well, obviously death, but how does it, if you don't have the ability to keep this moving going on, or you don't really have to keep running away, but somehow the movement must be incorporated. This is where we're talking about the undecidable, the notion of difference. This is, pardon me, where it has to be embedded. So, oh, I know where I was going with it. Sorry. So there's this question then, in Forrest Gump, you know, they keep saying, why are you running? And it's like, his answer is shit happens. So that's where that came from. So the point is that it's the happening that creates this movement. The happening doesn't have a position. It's a map without absolute points on the map. You want to just go. You want to just run. You know, small town boy, that thing, you know, picking up running. Just, I'm sure there's a song for every generation where you just run. You don't know where you're going, but you just know you gotta go. You just know you gotta go and just go. Okay, now in that going, that forms a happening. Now, that's what you call it if you're being hip in the Beat generation in New York. If you're being of this generation, and you're taking it out of the leaf from Heidegger, you call it an event. So let's follow that again. So the happening isn't that a brick fell on your head. That's not what happened. That's not a happening. That's not an event. The running, the knowing that you've got to go, and the going, wherever that going takes you, that's the happening. That's the event.
Is that to do with difference?
Yes, that has everything to do with difference. That is difference. The event of appropriation is difference. So, did that make sense? La. No, seriously, did you have a question on that?
No.
No.
I just looked forward.
So the event of appropriation, which includes simultaneity and difference. Pardon me, wrong. Simultaneity and duration. So it includes instant, and it includes long time. It includes, so today someone was asking if there was a color, or Henry was asking about the color of time. I wrote a piece called The Color of Time. It was in a, anyway, it was part of the Biennale, the Istanbul Biennale, in 2004, I think it was. Anyway, and it was getting into how your mood can take on a color, and how that color can be situated in terms of a time. So sometimes you can look at a color, and it'll take you right to that mood. It's not that green, for example, means X. It's that you've been able to link it together so that it forms that sequence. And that sequence is better understood as a color reddish, bluish, greenish than it is as a logic in the old-fashioned sense. So, and when I say old-fashioned sense, I mean X goes to Y, goes to Z. There's like a linear position. So, to summarize here, the logic, because I think maybe we just go to 7:30, or are you, because you look like you're a little bit flagging. Are you flagging? Are you like a little bit dead?
A little bit.
Okay, so the summary here is that what you have learned up to this point, I hope, what the takeaway is here. Do you use that expression here, the takeaway? Okay, what you to get out of this, that makes sense, right? You know, takeaway. I mean, it's a very New York expression, so you can imagine where it comes from. You know, 24-hour takeaways. You know, the takeaway from this, which you're going to grab from it and run with, is that a different form of logic is being introduced to you. That logic is called nonlinear logic. So when you now hear this expression, nonlinear logic, which becomes the basis of non-representational work, most of the performance stuff that you see, most of the kind of painting that's going on today, you will hopefully know that nonlinear requires a relationship of identity and difference that has to do with an event, or what you could call the event of appropriation. So linear logic allows one to make certain predictions. A goes to B, goes to C. They're linked. Although, as I said once before, they can be it could be in a spiral. It can look in a certain. It doesn't have to be literally in a line to be linear logic. Linear logic is causation. It has a relationship with probability that is readable. Nonlinear logic, emphasis on logic here, allows for a form of prediction to happen, a form of making to happen. But this making doesn't have a plan. It's just that when it works, it produces sense. It literally makes sense. Produces this thing called sense. Now, last part of the puzzle. Heidegger is going to call that dwelling. He's going to call this move around the event of appropriation dwelling. This is critical for you to understand, because in the dwelling, one is able to harness difference. It's like the God particle. One's able to harness it. In fact, actually, did anybody listen to Higgs boson today? Did Professor Higgs?
Yes.
He was great. Anyway, he failed physics. I thought it was fantastic. I love these people. Anyway, he just knew that there had to be this thing called the God particle. Now, he couldn't prove it until now. But what's interesting is that this notion of difference is the same thing as this thing called the God particle. We're not even going to go there right now, because it'll just, open a whole other can of worms about religion and God and so on and so forth. But just for the time being, this perdurance and the dwelling and the event of appropriation, they're all trying to manage what's called the God particle for the time being. They're all trying to manage difference. Now, when I think of a dwelling, the way Heidegger seems to talk about it, I always picture in my mind, which I don't say you have to picture, this is just what I do. When I lived in Canada, because Canada is like a wild country really, with lots of land and not very many people, as opposed to this country, which is not a wild country with not very much land and a lot of people.
Apart from Scotland.
What?
Apart from Scotland.
Yes, well, you don't know what's happening with poor Scotland now. Anyway, but I was able to have a horse. This horse was actually given to me, Manhattan, I call him. And Manhattan is Ojibwe for where the two rivers meet. That's what it means in Ojibwe. And he was a paint, or what they call him here, a piebald or something, horrible name. And he was a paint. He was a very spirited Indian horse, as we call him. Anyway, and he had a split face, white and brown, and a black mane, and he was very wild horse. In fact, that's why I was given him, because they were going to put him down. Nobody could handle him. I didn't know how to ride, so that did not, of course, stop me from thinking, oh, you could give me a horse, it's fantastic. Can't be that difficult, was my approach. Anyway, Manhattan reared up the first time I was on him, and I just leaned over and I said, look, I don't know how to ride, and you don't know how to be ridden. But if you continue like this, it's the glue factory. Like that's how it's going to be. And we became best friends, me and Manhattan. I learned a lot about friendship through this horse. But anyway, the clearing, because we were on 15,000 hectares of prime crown land. That's where we get to run with no fences, nothing. Just there are beavers and eagles and bears and coyote and timber wolves. It was the most amazing thing, a most amazing gift that this horse gave to me, that Manhattan gave to me. And we would ride at night in the snow with lanterns on our helmets. A bunch of us would be riding, or it was really, you couldn't believe it was practically like, just such an amazing time period. Anyway, we would go. Manhattan and I would go by ourselves. Sometimes I'd bring a dog called Deco. It was a part collie, part one of those skinny little nasty dogs. What are they called? Those sorts of the Doberman. It was a very odd mix. Her name was Deca, and she always went after porcupine and come back with like things all over her face. Anyway, we would go riding for 6 hours in one direction, because I did endurance riding, so we did 6 hours in one direction. Now, can you imagine riding 6 hours in one direction on a horse? It's not possible, even in Scotland, unfortunately, because that level of open land just doesn't exist here like it did there. And we would go to an area that was a clearing, and Manhattan would get down on all fours, and I would lean against him, and I would read out loud to this horse. And he would listen, he would hang out and give his opinion on things and do things like that. To me, that's always been my clearing. That image of sitting with my horse, literally laying against him, hearing him breathe, smelling that sweat, is remarkable. And it allowed me to just let go. It was just lovely. That was my clearing. That was my dwelling. Now, I don't know how to explain it other than just to describe the story like I just did just now. But that allowed for difference to be born. Because it's an event. It's not an event like, we're now going to go out and lie on the ground, I'm going to discuss poetry with you. It just happened. The first time it happened, it was bizarre because I didn't know what he was doing. He just sort of got down on his little knees and his little hind legs. And it's very odd to see a horse do that. I thought he was ill. I thought, oh my God, you're dying. And then he was just, sort of sitting there waiting. And so I thought, well, I don't know what's the matter with you. Maybe you're just hot. So I just took out a book and I laid up against him. And that's how it started. It wasn't like he said, look, I'm going to lay down now and you're going to because it was a horse, right? So the language, the communication happened. The way it happened. It was very magical. Very magical. And this is what I'm trying to get you to think about when you think about difference. This moment where a clearing is made, where an event starts its journey. And if you can grasp that little bit, you've got the identity and difference. But it's tough because this difference is totally different than any other difference. It's the God particle. It may not make any sense to you either. It's the thing that makes the identity actually happen, that makes the identity take place, literally take place. It's the thing that makes it real. This thing that doesn't exist but sort of does. Has a body but doesn't really. Creates a space but it's not an actual space. I go to that space all the time. Now, it was better when I could literally go to that space, but anyway, I go to that space. And that space can be a real space. It's not just, it has to be in your head. It's not that difference just has to exist in your head. It's a space. And if you're lucky, you can call it to you when you want to. Or not lucky, if you know what you're looking for and you're being trained, that's what this class is trying to do with you. I'm trying to get you to realize there's a tool, a logic, that allows you to create the dwelling. But this dwelling is a very odd form of logic, so you have to use it well, because it's like playing with fire, and it often blows up in your hands. I mean, it often doesn't work. But you know when it does work, it becomes, your work just takes off. Now, any questions so far? Next week, your book reviews are due. Now, you have to have, you can just put them into my pigeonhole, okay, or here. Don't give them to the secretaries because it's not marked. I mean, you can do that, but you don't have to. Just hand them in. I mean, it'd be marked in the sense I'm assessing it as a non-assessment. Wait a minute, that's not true. It is marked. It's marked, but it's not counted. That's what it is. Anyway, the point is just do the book review. You know, do you have any questions on that so far? Do you have any questions on what we just talked about? You guys were so silent today. I just think that you were very, very tired.
I've got a sort of fear of abandoning the sort of responsibility of linear logic, because I've been trained to do that, you know, diagnosis and evidence-based treatments and all that sort of thing. And in fact, it's terribly important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on the other end of the extreme from the sort of base closed system type Newtonian logic, is sort of daftness, ley lines. We are sort of hanging on to some sort of structure here, aren't we? Some lifeline.
Absolutely. We're calling it a logic. It's just a non-linear logic.
Yeah.
And the reason that it's like asking you to not necessarily abandon Euclidean geometry or Newtonian physics, but to put it to the side so that you can now try and get into space.
Yes.
You wouldn't ever get into space with Euclidean geometry. You need another form. You need some other logic that goes on. Now, what I'm not suggesting is that we abandon logic. What I'm pleading for you to understand is that logic is part of the senses. And it's not the rational part of the senses, it is the senses. Okay, so it's the is. Now, this is where it gets very complicated. Now, next week, we're going to move into the tensor band. You'll find it a lot more easier to understand. I mean, Heidegger is a tough nut to read. I'm not convinced you sort of grasped the whole thing because you were very quiet, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. But next week, it's a different type of way in, because this one is going to be talking about intensities. But it's the same question of how this event gets established, how the appropriation takes place, how the grasping happens, how dimensions take over your notions of layering, for example. That you're not thinking, you're thinking in terms of time dimension and various other types of dimensions, rather than forms of, like, I don't know, the literal layering of something. So that's what we're going to try and move into next week, think in terms of an economy. Okay, all good. That's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.